would you agree that AI anxiety is something that can be eased by achieving some level of mastery?
There are generally tasks that AI is very helpful for. Summarization, classification, high level research related tasks. This kind of ability to digest a large amount of data, comb through that data, reference that data accordingly when you get a response so you know that you're actually talking to the right kind of data and saving yourself time on that front. Those are just the quick wins to get you excited about it. I think with things like AI, especially for folks that are getting up to speed, you kind of need a little bit of that like dopamine hit where you're not going to go from zero to, oh my God, I solved all my problems using AI. But what little things can you use with this tool to solve a particular problem?
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.
When ChatGPT launched in 2023, learning changed overnight. Fast answers replaced judgment and verification, leaving a gap between getting an answer and knowing if it's correct. Few people understand that shift better than Elie Schoppik, who has spent most of his career at the intersection of education and engineering. He built early edtech tools to help people actually retain knowledge, founded Rhythm School, a Bay Area coding bootcamp built on practice and feedback, and now leads technical education at Anthropic. At Anthropic, Elie applies all of that to Claude Code, building learning-first workflows that force learners to read, validate, and work with models. He designs guided prompts, example-driven exercises, and low-friction checks that make AI a teacher. Listen to this episode to get concrete techniques you can use tomorrow, how to structure examples and guided prompts for reliable outputs, how to design AI-assisted workflows that build judgment, and a few simple exercises your team can run to raise real AI fluency. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Elie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
My pleasure. Well, to start off, can you give a quick intro of yourself, your background, and what you do at Anthropic?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Elie Schoppik. I lead our technical education team at Anthropic. I've been there for just over a year, and technical education encompasses the courses that we make, the learning management system that we've released, our Anthropic Academy courses. This also includes the documentation on our website, so managing the team that owns the documentation for Anthropic's products, as well as a few other things. My background is kind of the intersection of engineering and education. Before Anthropic, I ran a coding bootcamp for about 8 years in the Bay Area, worked at a few others before that, and then previously working on a startup and originally in financial consulting. So Anthropic has kind of been the culmination of a lot of education and engineering for me.
And the startup was Rhythm School?
The first startup I founded was actually a education startup to help folks memorize information more effectively. So pre-Duolingo and Quizlet and so on. And the second startup was Rhythm School, a coding bootcamp based in the Bay Area. We initially were completely in person. When COVID hit, shifted to online.
That's amazing. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for folks who are investing their careers in educating folks about technical skills and AI literacy, especially. I mean, that's something that is critical today. And you've really laid a foundation with your experiences at Rhythm School and prior to that as well. And so having taught thousands of developers how to code, now you're teaching them how to integrate AI at Anthropic. What's fundamentally different about AI education versus traditional programming education?
That's a really good question. A lot of the education shift that has happened since AI has been released, and we actually saw this towards the end of Rhythm School, where ChatGPT had just come out, and all of a sudden, the ways in which our students were trying to learn completely shifted. The process of originally trying to read documentation, go to Stack Overflow, find the answer, completely shifted to, hey, ChatGPT, just give me the answer. And we actually saw a lot of negatives with that kind of approach of just having this oracle of sort that you could trust or not trust, but it didn't matter. You would just try it anyway. So a lot of the things that we've been thinking about are how to use tools like AI to augment the way in which you're learning, but still make sure that at the end of the day, you are learning. And one of the biggest gaps that we see, especially with folks that are getting up to speed with technologies in the AI space, or even trying to learn new things using AI, is a lot of that hard learning has been removed. And it doesn't always have to be extremely difficult, but there still has to be that somewhat slower process of really absorbing and practicing and truly demonstrating mastery, as opposed to using a tool where you might not even know if it's giving you the right answer or not. You just kind of trust it blindly.
And so what does that look like? And it's a really good point that you bring up. I think AI can either be a crutch or it can be a tool used to accelerate the learning process. What does AI education look like in a way that is actually lending to real learning and not necessarily just memorizing facts or getting outputs from an LLM that you can copy and paste?
Yeah, I'll definitely take it from the technical perspective. So, from an engineering perspective, the shift has really changed from being able to write code to being able to truly read code and understand code that is written for you, given that LLMs can just output code so much faster than we can write it, and in many cases can do it pretty decently. It's much more on us as the humans to be literally the human in the loop in whatever situation we're in, and to verify the accuracy of what the LLM is giving us. In order to be able to do that, you still have to have that underlying skill that the LLM is doing. And I think some of the mistakes that folks make is they jump to the I will be the verifier of truth without having that underlying skill in order to truly verify. So we see that quite a bit in the engineering space. And there are quite a few tools that we've introduced in a variety of Claude products. In Claude Code, we have output styles, including a learning mode that really forces you to kind of work alongside the AI to solve the problem, as opposed to the AI just giving you the answer. We also have in our educational offerings in Claude AI that same kind of learning mode where we really encourage the student or learner or user to work alongside the AI so that there are follow-up questions that the AI is asking, or the AI is not giving the solution and instead kind of working alongside the learner. And that is just kind of what we have to do at this point, because otherwise we have this oracle that one cannot truly verify. And that becomes a bit dangerous as you're kind of building what you think is your knowledge, but it's really just on a house of cards.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we touch on the different products and offerings that Anthropic is working on. So right now, Claude Code is like the belle of the ball. I absolutely love it, and I would love to spend some time talking about Claude Code. A lot of people may not realize that MCP was something that was pioneered by the Anthropic team, and MCPs have revolutionized a lot of the ways that we use LLMs, and they present a huge opportunity in unlocking more capabilities for LLMs to actually carry out actions in different tools like Gmail, like Google Calendar. Can you give a quick overview of maybe the top two, three different features that you're prioritizing right now at Anthropic from an educational perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with those two. So let's start with Claude Code, which is a command line interface. So you're working with a terminal. This is not a web interface. This is a program that you install on your machine in the terminal, and you are talking to Anthropic models. And while it is named Claude Code, there are actually a tremendous amount of non-technical use cases. And we can definitely dive into those in a little bit for how different teams from marketing to design to legal can use this tool. Claude Code is a agentic application, which basically means that you are talking to the model, but we've built a harness for you to make use of different tools, external data, much more powerful ability to interact with your machine and perform web search, where instead of just a standard chat interface, you can actually have this tool create extremely powerful assets for you, web applications, mobile applications, whatever that may be. So developers predominantly use tools like Claude Code, but you can imagine many different teams needing to create many different kinds of assets, or even non-technical teams needing to do somewhat technical things and don't totally know how to do it. Claude Code is an extremely powerful way to do that. So a lot of the educational efforts that we have are really centered around explaining what Claude Code is to folks that might not be extremely technical or even comfortable in the terminal or a command line. The second approach with Claude Code is making sure that folks who are developers are fully aware of all of the features that we have. Something that is so incredible about Claude Code is the velocity at which we ship new features, which is incredibly exciting, and we're testing things all the time. But it also is an interesting educational challenge where we have to be really particular with the things that we introduce to our audience, not inundate them with so many different features, but also make sure that we are explaining all the different things that you can do. And many times we see users of Claude Code come back and say, wow, I didn't know about the subagents feature. I didn't know about output styles, or I think I caught a glimpse of what hooks were, but I didn't really see exactly how to use them. And a lot of the educational efforts we have are to systematically build knowledge from the ground up into using these tools. And the hope is that as you potentially shift to different ecosystems, or you move to a different chat interface, or even potentially a different model, you still have a really good foundation to be successful no matter what you do. So that's the Claude Code part of things. On the MCP side, again, just to give a high level overview, MCP, or the Model Context Protocol, is a open source protocol being just a set of rules governing communication between two systems. This is not the sexiest or most exciting thing, but at the end of the day, we see a lot of companies building integrations with external data systems. You mentioned things like Gmail. Models out of the box don't know how to get your email. They don't know how to find files in your file system, or find some information in something in Google Drive. MCP is the technology that powers connections between your AI applications and your data sources. And not only is it open source, it is completely available for anybody in the ecosystem to use and work on. It's also model agnostic. So even though it was developed initially at Anthropic, it is now used across many different model providers in many different tools. And the goal here is really to democratize access to applications, data sources, and make that completely model agnostic.
What do you think has led to Claude Code becoming such a resounding hit? We're seeing not just engineering teams start to adopt Claude Code and rave about it, but we're seeing folks who are non-technical using Claude Code for some crazy workflows. We'll link to a PDF in the show notes where there's an entire list of different things and different workflows that Claude Code can support, many of which are not technical for teams like customer service teams and marketing teams, et cetera. What makes Claude Code so special compared to other CLI-based LLM applications?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And even when we were initially playing around with versions of Claude Code internally before we released it externally, and Boris, the creator of Claude Code, talks about this, just the usage kind of shot through the roof when we knew we were onto something. The incredible ease of use and almost instant feedback that you can get that allows you to quickly see, wow, I'm creating things that are really valuable really quickly, and I have this relatively simple interface to do it. I think what's so wonderful about a command line interface, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we're used to really nice web interfaces and lots of shiny things and all these different buttons and different kinds of user experiences. There's only so much you can do in the terminal. And while that might make the feature set a little bit more minimal, or it might make the way that it looks not as lavish as a website and so on, it's actually much simpler to use. It also lets us iterate much faster. So the ability to be in an environment, especially for developers that they're very familiar with, and just get the thing done that you want to do and do it quickly, makes it very easy to see the value very quickly. So the onboarding to a tool like Claude Code is relatively minimal, because you open it up, you prompt, you see what it does, you see the result, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat.
So let's say I'm somebody at an organization that has heard about Claude Code and all the incredible things that it can do, but I haven't had a chance to experiment with it on my own. I know there's a lot of folks, a lot of my friends and group chats are talking about Claude Code, and they haven't actually tried it, but they're listening to the hype. What's the best way to actually get a feel for the different things that it's capable of and go from Claude Code curious to actually becoming a Claude Code power user? I'm assuming using it is a big part, but what would you suggest for somebody who's starting out in terms of what they should focus on building first, or how they can learn about the art of the possible when they're getting started?
Yeah, so they're really, I would say, two or three different buckets for someone coming to Claude Code. If you are someone who is technical, just start asking it to do something related to technology you are working with. We often recommend, especially if you are technical and you know how to write code, use Claude Code to understand code before you start asking it to write code. Because actually seeing its ability to understand, especially very, very large code bases, and even if you're non-technical, you could take a code base that you're working with and just get some questions answered. So you can imagine you're someone in product or someone in a different part of the organization that just wants to know if things are possible, how to propose things to an engineering team, how to even ask the basic technical questions and have some good answers to start. Claude Code is a very easy way to go ahead and do that. If you are coming from a different kind of industry, you can use Claude Code to do rapid business prototyping. You can use Claude Code for legal workflow automation. You can use it for creating applications in Google Suite or even making your own Chrome extensions. So a lot of it is really, and we talk about a lot of AI education and even technical education, it's really just that curiosity. And whether you want to call that vibe coding or not, it's really just the idea of take some kind of idea, some kind of thing that you want to make, and even just ask Claude Code if it's possible. Claude Code will, try its best to make that thing happen for you. But in many cases, it's also just nice validation. Hey, I have this idea. Hey, I want to build this thing. I'm working on this particular project. What would it look like to add this potential feature? Or if I need to talk to my engineering team or my manager who is technical, what do I say? There's just so much value in getting that kind of tooling up and running quickly.
Any surprising use cases that have stood out to you recently?
So some of the use cases that have been actually just a lot more impressive than I might have expected is using Claude Code with MCP. When we talk about that, basically any kind of external service or integration. And one of the most popular combinations that I've seen has been to create web applications or any kind of visual interface based on a mockup. So you can imagine you're a designer or you're not even a designer. Someone gives you something and you want to turn it into a real world web application. Using MCP and connecting to a tool like Figma or connecting to a tool like Playwright, which allows you to open a browser and take screenshots and see what things look like, you can feed visual designs to Claude Code, and it can very quickly analyze that design, figure out what to build, and repetitively open it up in the browser, take a screenshot, make a change, do it again, do it again, do it again. When we initially first started playing around with that, it was, okay, I wonder how this actually works. This might, kind of looks cool, but it is wild how quick you can take mockups or any kind of visualization and actually turn it into something you can start getting your hands on. And what's cool about that is it might not necessarily be a surprising use case for technical individuals, but for folks that are non-technical who have the idea I want to build, the website I want to build, here's the sketch, here's the drawing, here's something that I designed, being able to actually turn that into something tangible really, really quickly and very accurately is just wild compared to what we could only do, 6 months ago or a year ago.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the key lesson there is to give Claude Code the idea of what good looks like by giving it that end state screenshot and letting it continue to iterate, almost closing that loop so that it knows what good looks like, and it will continue to iterate until it gets to that definition of good on its own.
100%. Yeah, there are two really important things that you bring up when mentioning that. One is at the end of the day, and this is a prompt engineering trick that is going to work forever, the more examples you can give to the model, you don't have to go too crazy. But at the end of the day, these models are trying to predict the next bit of text, the next bit, the next token essentially in a series of tokens. And the more examples you can give it for what good looks like or what good looks like to you, the more accurate you're going to get responses out of the box. Not for every single thing, but especially for things that are a little bit more in your style or a little bit more particular, that kind of context, or we can call it prompt engineering, context engineering, whatever you want it to be, as long as you give the model an idea of what should be a good output or what does good copy look like and so on, the less you are potentially leaning just on the model's training data to try to create something new and novel. It's also where the MCP and context part comes in. We like to say that models are only as good as the context that you give to them. So especially when bringing in your emails and things from Google Drive and all kinds of integrations, if the model doesn't have that context, it could be very intelligent, but it's just not very practical for your use case.
Yeah, you mentioned something very important there. Context engineering is arguably one of the most important things that folks should focus on mastering in order to get the most out of these tools, because ultimately these models are only as good as the context that's provided to them. And even if they have an understanding of countless different topics and things, you want to narrow down the task for them so that they know which part of the latent space to focus on, right? And just narrowing that scope in the same way that you might delegate to a virtual assistant, for example. One of the things that I'm finding really interesting is this idea of taking somebody that is AI curious and getting them to a state of AI literacy that is dangerous, or they can actually start building workflows that are lending to ROI in whatever use case that they're applying it to. So, of course, one of the ways that you can get there is by actually interacting with these tools. That's kind of a prerequisite. You need to be hands on with these tools. That's something that I think nobody can really argue against. But if there were some core topics that folks wanted to focus on studying, right? I think having a baseline education of so that they can make the most of their journey, what types of things would you suggest? And just to add a little bit more context here, one of the things that I think is dangerous is being overly reliant on specific tools, right? And maybe just going with a specific tool and using it. Maybe you built a workflow successfully, but you don't really have an underlying understanding of how that tool is actually leveraging the context that you're giving it and the limitations of that tool as well. What types of topics would you suggest folks should spend some time actually studying that may not be intuitively grasped by going the hands-on route?
hmm Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's always tempting just to tell someone like, ah, just open up, Claude AI or go to Claude Code and play around with the tool and you'll learn what you need to learn. I think that there are really two different approaches. If you are someone who is not particularly technical and that is not something that you want to invest more time in, then the idea of kind of AI fluency is a fantastic direction. And there's a extremely popular course that we have on our learning management system on AI fluency. This is a really valuable resource that in about an hour and a half or so, you can learn some of the most important pieces for working with these models. And while you do not need to learn the underlying machine learning and matrix multiplication and calculus that happens under the hood with these models, there's some really important fundamental pieces to learn about what generative AI actually is. And what does it mean when you're talking about next token prediction? What does it mean when we talk about it being an unsolved research problem that we don't understand how every single piece in the network flows through and why we have things like interpretability? What does AI safety actually mean when we talk about that? And why is that important? What are some serious concerns that we have in this ecosystem with AI? So these are things that you might be able to read about here or there, but I think what's so valuable about a lot of this educational content, and many different labs offer this, is it's coming from the source. And I think that's extremely valuable, especially for us and the mission that we have. So I think for folks that are not taking the, coding route and so on, AI fluency is a great place to start. There are quite a few effective prompt techniques that still apply. That could be, end shot prompting, which is basically just examples like we spoke about being really relevant, giving that kind of context necessary. But also from a slightly technical standpoint, even if you are not going to be writing the underlying code to make things like MCP happen, it's important to have a high level idea of what it is and how it works. And those are things that you can talk to an AI and ask it questions about, but you still just have to be really, really mindful of making sure you're assessing your knowledge as you go through. And that's where some of the high level education can really come in. So it's not something that requires, years of education or even semesters of university like courses. It's just short, focused, intense learning, and then immediately putting in that application yourself.
Love that. Very practical advice there. And you mentioned safe AI, and this is very top of mind for many organizations, especially in regulated industries, is they want to make sure that their employees feel empowered to be able to leverage these tools for obvious reasons, but they want to make sure that folks are operating within specific constraints and considerations so that they're enabling these different use cases in a safe way. Can you talk a bit about constitutional AI, what it is, and how organizations can leverage it?
Yeah, very much so. So constitutional AI is actually something that's been around for quite a while. This is a paper that we released in 2023. And the idea here was that we, instead of just having human feedback on model responses, particularly around things like safety and honesty and harmlessness, we trained a model on a constitution. What is that constitution? Lists of things that we as a society have agreed upon are beneficial. That could be the UN Declaration of Human Rights or terms of service for certain companies, or generally papers that we as a society have agreed are very valuable for pushing us forward and determining what helpful, honest, and harmless looks like. And we trained a model to figure out different kinds of input and score things in that category of what is helpful, what is honest, what is harmless. And we actually saw that when training our larger models and our main models using these tools, the output that the model gave based on this training was more valuable, more helpful, and better aligned even with what humans would want than what humans could do on their own. So this idea of reinforcement learning and training our models based on AI feedback was what was so groundbreaking about constitutional AI. This is not what we use to train every single part of our models. There's still lots of other things that go into it. But just this idea of training these models to be very intentional about the way in which we talk about more sensitive subjects is also something that many other labs have applied right now. So one of the ideas with what we built at Anthropic, or what the founders have really started with at the end of the day, is to safely make the transition through AI. And what that means for us is not only being at the frontier with the quality of our models in many different categories, but also at the frontier with the research that we're doing. Because the research is the most important piece to make sure that we can be safe when we do this. But being at the frontier is how we are taken seriously. So it's really a two-pronged approach to make sure that while our models are absolutely excellent at many different kinds of things, it's actually the research that folks become aware of to see the societal impacts of what we're building, or some of the alignment concerns as these models become more and more powerful, or like I mentioned, interpretability, really trying to decipher what's happening under the hood from almost a biological level in these neural networks. So that kind of idea of safety in general is really across a multitude of different domains, but is still paramount to what we do. On the safety front as well, something that we talked about quite a bit and released is our responsible scaling policy. And this is a public document that we hold ourselves accountable to, that anyone can read. And in this responsible scaling policy, as we start to see models achieve certain levels that meet certain safety thresholds, we have to ensure that before we release those models publicly, we have the correct safeguards in place for those models. And that is something that has been kind of in our DNA from the very beginning, and something that I think a lot of other labs are really adopting as well and working with us to kind of enforce. So it's something that's mission critical to what we're doing, and really kind of starting with things like constitutional AI a few years back to some of the more latest research, constitutional classifiers, and much more research, especially in alignment. There's a lot that we've really done here to be at the forefront.
How can organizations take this idea of guidelines for their AI systems, if that's how we can broadly classify constitutional AI, and form fit it for their specific organization? Is constitutional AI extensible? And also, does it factor into things like data privacy as well? Or is that a completely different challenge with a completely different set of solutions? For example, for healthcare companies that want to ensure that their employees are able to build useful AI workflows without leaking sensitive data.
Yeah, very much so. So I would say it's slightly different than what constitutional AI fits in with, but still completely aligned with what we think about when working with companies where those are extremely sensitive concerns. One of the things that we are extremely proud of is the ability to interact with our models across many different ecosystems. And what we mean by that is, if there is a company that is working in the Amazon Web Services ecosystem or Google Cloud ecosystem, you can talk to our models in those ecosystems and ensure that your data is completely within that isolated environment. So we have many different customers who have been on AWS for decades or Google for decades and so on, and don't want a situation where that data ever has to be anywhere near anything else. That's where those integrations are relatively seamless, and where we see a lot of success with more regulated companies, companies with data sovereignty and data governance considerations, leaning on our cloud partners to be extremely helpful to us there. For all of our enterprise customers as well, and this has been something we've had for since the very beginning, we don't train on any data, and especially with third-party providers, when data is in their particular environments, it never comes to us. The information that we have when working with our third parties at most are information from classifiers. If there are any safety considerations, those are things that we can share with our partners. But there's fundamentally, especially when working with our third-party partners like AWS and GCP, data that just doesn't leave that ecosystem.
So I want to shift gears a little bit here, because one of the topics that is getting a lot of discussion online is around the idea of AI ROI. And there's a couple of stats that I want to share here. There was a stat that was shared broadly around 80% of organizations reporting no tangible enterprise-wide EBIT impact from AI. And you may have seen there was an MIT study done recently where it was concluded that 95% of organizations that have experimented with AI projects have not seen any successful outcomes from their AI initiatives. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we're seeing this bifurcation where these studies are pointing at a broader AI ROI challenge, whereas other organizations are seeing massively productive outcomes?
I'm by no means an expert in the research in the paper, and still have a lot more of my own digging to kind of do into it. So I'll give you a kind of high level overview of the way that I think about things. We, at this point, have not been doing this for a tremendously long period of time. This technology is still incredibly new. And we can always say that the models are, the worst right now. They're only going to get better. So there's so many other things that can be unlocked. But I would take that with a grain of salt. I think the thing that we are seeing exceptionally is there are certain fields, certain areas, certain use cases where this adds a tremendous amount of value. Coding being one of those, as you can see these coding assistants, coding tools, coding companies, and so on becoming incredibly valuable, tremendous amounts of revenue, providing a lot of valuable pieces to, do code automation, code migration, massive code transformations. That's really where we see a tremendous amount of value. At the same time, with a lot of these pilots and experiments and so on, when we think about even doing use case discovery, there are many companies that might come to us with hundreds of potential use cases of we want to try this across so many different things. And a lot of work that we do sometimes helps narrow down those use cases to let's just start with the simplest thing, even if it might not be the most exciting. Let's just get something up and off the ground. And I think there are quite a few different companies that may have not started building earlier and are trying to catch up and throw a lot of things at the wall. Many things don't work. So in terms of that kind of not seeing the EBIT or EBITDA impact, we're still extremely early. And I think a lot of these kind of pilots, I would not essentially classify as these are fast tracks to completely new revenue unlocks, but really more kind of research projects and experiments, because we're at a stage still, especially with tools like MCP and so on, where it used to be get your data house in order, and then once your data is good to go, everything will continue. There's still so many other things that companies need to do. So while it might not be the most cost effective to build MCP servers and start setting up those integrations within the company, you're setting yourself up for a foundation where when these models can get even a little bit more accurate on the agentic front, or they can perform longer horizon tasks or so on, there's a lot of infrastructure that you've put in that is unlocked that you can allow for these more powerful use cases. So I think that we might not be in a situation where a lot of these use cases, or a majority of them, are immediately revenue generating, or the ROI might not be there. But I would definitely argue the other side, where building the infra right now is exceptionally important, because while we might not see the exact ROI, I think that we can see the use cases and what this technology can do. And as it continues to get better, which it has, especially over the past couple of years, there's a lot of opportunity once that, infra is in place.
Yeah, getting the info ready, very important. And also the educational part, very important as well. What role does education play in helping an organization be part of that 5% or expanding that 5%?
Very much so. I think that that kind of ability to be curious and ability to try new things consists of two pieces. One of those is obviously the understanding and curiosity and trying to build new things, but also the education that those folks have. And in many situations, if you have a workforce or have a team that's trying to get up to speed with Claude Code or doing some kind of massive code migration, if they're not familiar with the ways in which to best prompt the models and the ways to best give context to the models and so on, it's extremely likely that the outputs are not going to be very good. If companies don't know how to write evals, or evaluations is what evals are short for, so kind of unit tests or rigorous tests for how well these models are doing, if they don't have any of that, they're essentially just building on a house of cards. So with a lot of these pilots and a lot of these kind of introductions to building AI and using AI at a company, it's why we also stress why evaluations are so important. Because as you experiment with different models, as you experiment with different use cases, you really want to know, if this is not revenue generating or profit generating or whatever the metric may be, how far off am I from that? And can I use the same level of benchmarking and testing when a new model version comes out or a more cost-effective model comes out? Can I just try it again and then see if it works? And that, again, it goes back to that infra piece of why it's so important.
So the infra part, the AI education part, both very important. I'm sure in your role, you get exposure to plenty of different organizations and plenty of different types of outcomes depending on their behaviors. And assuming that the organizations that see the most success are the ones that invest in those two categories, anything else or any other common patterns that you've seen with organizations that have successfully partnered with Anthropic or otherwise and seen great outcomes?
I think that the spending more time in the use case discovery, and sometimes even starting with the boring stuff, a lot of these companies have just started with customer success, customer support chatbot, and layering on retrieval augmented generation, or layering on a couple extensible different tools and data integrations and so on. Start to see the value a bit earlier. I think sometimes companies that kind of want to jump for a multi-agent architecture or so on because that sounds exciting or that's what they're reading about, that's usually a recipe for disaster, or unfortunately where a lot of the hype kind of catches up. So it is a little bit kind of like, if you eat your vegetables first, you're going to, start off with a healthy infrastructure. And I think that that kind of idea of starting with the things that might not be as exciting, but that we've seen can really lead to success, and then layering on the agentic architectures after is a really good place to start for many companies, especially those that might not be as AI fluent at the moment.
Yeah, you're touching on a lot of things that other guests on the show have echoed as well. A lot of the same things. And one of the things that has come up in every single interview that we've done with organizations that really are part of that 5% that have seen successful outcomes from AI adoption is they're doing hackathons. Funny enough, that's become a really interesting and compelling form factor for companies to shake up an organization, get folks to catalyze around the idea of adopting AI, finding those compelling use cases, and actually getting hands on. Curious if that also resonates with you. Are hackathons something that you're also seeing as a successful medium for transforming organizations? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw this tremendously with MCP, with the Model Context Protocol, where we would see companies hack on MCP servers. We would see people in the open source community take some time building things with MCP. The reason why hackathons are incredibly effective is it's a low stakes way to experiment with things that can be extremely valuable. And you can take big swings. And if you miss, no one cares. And when you put yourself in the business scenario where we have a limited amount of time, we have a limited amount of resources, we have to deliver this value, but we're not totally sure if we can do it. Again, you're kind of setting yourself up for a coin flip of sort. But the beauty of a hackathon, and why obviously many big tech companies have had many incredible features that have come out of the hackathons, even internally, that they've done, is just this idea of letting people roam a little bit more freely and removing some of the sometimes, business related guardrails where maybe someone wouldn't really want to do that idea, or maybe we can't really allocate 3 days of engineering time to experiment with that. That's where the beauty of this comes in. So many use cases are things that we have figured out and companies can repeat, but there's still so many things that are undiscovered. And I think having that ability to just roam free and discover in a hackathon is what leads to these kind of massive wins that you're going to see, and where many really awesome ideas and features come in for a variety of companies at this point.
One of the other interesting trends that I'm seeing is there's a lot of organizations that are almost shell shocked by the incredible progress that we're making on the AI tooling side. The tooling is progressing so quickly. There's new things coming out all the time. I mean, MCP has been around for some time, but there's new types of protocols coming out. There are new techniques for things like context retrieval, information retrieval from databases. How can companies avoid the analysis paralysis of being in arguably the fastest moving tech revolution in history and just move forward with more confidence?
The thing that I love so much about that is that, MCP hasn't even been around for a year at this point, yet the things move so quickly in this industry that you're like, that's been around for so long. And that's kind of the massive pace at which we are moving and innovating. I think at the end of the day, there are some things that you always need to have and some things that you can reach for when you need them. And this, again, is the same exact pitch for, you always need to have evals. You always need to have some way of evaluating the AI system that you're building, because agentic frameworks and architectures and multi-agent paradigms and so on will come and go. And in this case, there's so many that are being released. There's so many agentic frameworks and so many tools for integrating all kinds of systems. But at the end of the day, just like when you're building serious software, if you don't have tests to test that software that you're writing, you're building on a house of cards. And now in the AI space, you're building on a house of cards in a non-deterministic system. So you're just kind of exponentially making this more difficult for yourself. So while there's lots of fun agentic frameworks and ideas and tools to reach for, having those evals and having your kind of house in order is extremely, extremely important. That is the thing that, as you want to experiment with new tools, you still have that foundation to see if it actually is leading you in the right direction or not. A lot of other pieces like logging and observability into what the AI is doing is also mission critical. And as you start building more agentic systems and hand over more autonomy to the model, making sure that you have observability not only into the actions of the model, but also the latency and the cost of what is happening and how token hungry this is, that's also mission critical. So it's not the most exciting answer, but it still is making sure that you have those essential patterns from software that we've established, like observability and monitoring, and making sure that production systems stay up and are reliable. You want to make sure you have all that stuff, and then you can reach for the agentic frameworks and play around with maybe some of those more interesting ideas once you have your house in order.
Yeah, it goes back to that old adage of what gets measured gets managed. And that's really the value that evals provide, is they help you measure the subjective quality of these AI systems so that you know whether you're moving the needle forward. And I'm also assuming that AI fluency, AI literacy plays a big part in this as well. And you hinted at this earlier, where you described the idea of learning about things like context engineering, how exactly that works, learning the fundamentals of MCP at a very high level, right? You don't need to necessarily get into the weeds of how to build an MCP server, but understanding all of the different pieces that ultimately lend to these LLM workflows and applications, so that when the technology progresses, you can associate it with those different building blocks and improvements in those different areas, right? Like rather than seeing the entire thing as a fixed moment in time system that you're betting is going to be here to stay, right? The form factor for these things might change, right? MCP may make way for other types of protocols, or context engineering might look different. But if you understand the ethos of what context engineering is trying to accomplish and how these systems are able to perform at their best, then as the technology progresses and new models come out, you understand the role that those innovations play in improving the overall workflows. Am I right in describing that?
Yeah, I think it really, to your point, just boils down to what is the problem that this thing is solving? And can I explain that? And can I understand how it is going about solving that problem at a very high level? And as new interesting things come out, you, as the AI ready individual or AI literate individual, can firmly, without using the AI, say to yourself, this is something that is interesting. This is something that is going to solve a problem for me. This is something that's going to add value. This is something that I'm not totally sure, I'm on the fence and I need to do more research. It's having that confidence in yourself and knowledge yourself to make that kind of judgment call, because to your point, new things are coming out all the time. New models are being released all the time. So how do you know when to invest time into building, learning about something versus putting something a bit on the shelf, seeing what the ecosystem looks like and potentially coming back to it or even ignoring it?
So let's talk a bit about use case scoping, both at an individual level, finding different use cases where you can adopt AI to improve your own personal workflows, or use cases at an organizational level to improve workflows across a specific function, let's say an engineering team or a customer success team. How would you go about finding those initial use cases to target if you're just getting started and you want to try to use Claude Code and MCPs to improve your operating leverage in some of those workflows?
Yeah, a lot of it is there are generally tasks that AI is very helpful for: summarization, classification, high level research related tasks. That idea applies across all different kinds of domains. And that could be as simple as something like, can you just look through my email and find all conversations that I've had with Ellie related to AI fluency and just summarize it for me? Or I realize that I haven't gotten back to Ellie. It's been like 2 weeks. Can you just catch me up on what has happened? This kind of ability to digest the large amount of data, comb through that data, reference that data accordingly when you get a response, so you know that you're actually talking to the right kind of data, and saving yourself time on that front. Those are just the quick wins to get you excited about it. I think with things like AI, especially for folks that are getting up to speed, you kind of need a little bit of that like dopamine hit, where you're not going to go from zero to, oh my God, I solved all my problems using AI. But what little things can you use with this tool to solve a particular problem? For some people, that could be as simple as I'm reading through like 15 PDFs trying to find this data. Can I just feed that to Claude? Can Claude look through those documents and tell me the thing I'm looking for and show me where in the document that thing is? And then I'm done. And that quick little, oh wow, that saved me some time. That was cool. It builds up a little bit, kind of like a house would. So you want to make sure that you get a couple quick wins so you can see the value in this. And a lot of times the use case scoping ends up being really long conversations where you don't actually get to kind of get your hands on something. So the summarization, the aggregation of data and getting insights from data, the high level research across a bunch of different tasks, or trying to figure out a quick answer to something. Sometimes even just rewriting of text or changing some copy of an email, or give me 10 different versions. That kind of writer's block that we all have sometimes of, I just can't think of a title for this podcast. So here's what I got so far. Just give me a couple. You might not get the one that you're looking for, but it's going to nudge you in a direction of like, oh, that's a pretty good one. Let me work with that. So it's a little kind of rushes that you need to build that momentum.
I love the mention of dopamine hits because I think the chemistry is actually quite important. And maybe you can confirm this, but one of the things that I notice is when you're taking a beginner and you're getting those quick wins and you're getting those dopamine hits, you quickly see folks get AI pilled, where they all of a sudden realize that this technology is capable of doing these things that they may not have anticipated. They get that wow moment, similar to probably just traditional software engineering as well, right? When you are learning how to write Python code and it successfully executes and you've built whatever you're trying to build, there's that dopamine hit that you get that gets you excited, and then you want to start moving to more complex, more useful tasks afterwards. Would you agree that the dopamine hit is actually quite important as a initial propellant to accelerate?
Yeah, I definitely would say that. I'll also give you kind of the flip side here, which is you also at the same time, especially for many folks that are just getting up to speed with this kind of tool, sometimes develop a pretty gnarly, for lack of a better word, imposter syndrome, where, wow, this thing actually does know almost everything, or whatever. It might not know this exactly, but wow, this is full of information. This can do pretty much most of the things that I'm doing. And wow, if it's only been around for a couple of years and I gave it a couple more years and it just got like 10 or 15% better, this is going to do pretty much most of the things that I'm doing. So where exactly do I fit into the equation? And with a lot of folks, especially in tasks where, AI is doing already a pretty good job, a lot of that starts to come in as well. There's also the situation where folks can kind of get that dopamine hit over and over and over again and start to maybe overtrust what the model is doing. And if you don't have that understanding of the model can hallucinate, what does that actually mean? Why you can't tell the model something like, hey, you sure? Or what level of confidence are you that this is actually the case? And you're not going to get something that's, very verifiable or something that's terribly valuable. Or if you keep asking the model over and over again, are you sure? What about this? What about this? You might get lots of back and forth of, oh, you're right. Actually, you're right. Actually, you're right. Oh, maybe you're wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And that kind of trusting in a system and getting a clearly deterministic output, that's also a part where sometimes people run into that a little too late and then come back and say, this is, shenanigans, or they never run into it for a very, very, very long time and start to blindly trust the system, which is also a real problem.
Yeah, you touched on a really important topic there around AI anxiety. Folks are anxious about the progress of this technology and their potentially their livelihoods being disrupted as a result. And I think a good framing that folks can approach this with is, look, this wave is going to take place whether we like it or not. And the best thing that we can do is learn how to ride the wave, right? It's of all the options that we have as to how we move forward, that is the most optimal option for all of us, is to learn how to ride the wave. And I actually have found that many folks who are AI anxious become much less anxious once they have some level of mastery of these tools, because they then are able to stand out in the job market within their organizations and be part of that class of folks that are competent at being able to understand where to apply AI, where the limitations are. And that's a useful skill across really any tech or company in the world nowadays. Every tech company is thinking about how to hire AI literate folks, how to assess that, right? We chatted with the folks at Zapier and Intercom, and companies are very quickly changing their hiring criteria, and AI literacy is becoming a core part of the screening process. Would you agree that AI anxiety is something that can be eased by achieving some level of mastery of over these tools, or do you think that this may be a temporary fix?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me personally, these do not represent the views of my employer. I am one who is anxious as well. I think that you can use education to help overcome some of that anxiety, but I think that this is absolutely technology that's going to completely upend our society as we know it. And it's mission critical that we take the time and investment from the policy side and societal impact side to really sit down and understand what this technology can do. And that's why obviously there are a tremendous amount of policy efforts that we have to educate these policymakers of what it is that we're doing and what this might lead to and what those paths look like. And not the doomsday scenario, but a very realistic scenario where, like Dario, our CEO, talks about quite a bit. This is a technology that can very much change the way in which people work and change the way in which people think about their employment and what that might look like. And I think 100% to your point, getting more literate, getting more comfortable investing in this can be a wonderful way to start future proofing as much as possible. But we still have yet to see what this is going to look like. So we're kind of riding this wave and we don't know how high the wave is going to go or how high the crash is going to be, if there is going to be one. But I think making sure that we're doing everything possible, just like you mentioned, to get up to speed and be literate and use this tool and understand what it does well and its limitations, but also at the same side, really be mindful and think about what we can do on any front to advance people's understanding of what this technology does, what it can do, and what those societal impacts might actually be.
Wow, yeah, no, really appreciate the candor there. And speaking of Dario, I know he predicted AGI in the next several years. I think the timeline he provided most recently was 2026 to 2027. How should organizations balance moving fast enough to stay competitive while also ensuring responsible and safe deployments of AI? How can they balance those two seemingly opposing forces?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, these predictions are things that we obviously can't know for sure if they are going to happen. But I do think in the near term, this technology is going to get exceptionally powerful. And there is only so much that we can all do. But again, it goes back to maybe the less interesting and less sexy kinds of things, which is make sure that you have rigorous ways of evaluating these systems that you use. Make sure that you don't put systems into production where you cannot track what the system is doing, as you would with any other piece of software, any other kind of technology. So as much as we can get our ducks in a row and build the infra necessary to understand what's happening in very complex agentic systems that we might be building, or log each interaction. And if something is not going as expected, we can diagnose it appropriately. We have to start building that infra as these start to get more and more intelligent. And as we start to hand over more control to these models, and we even see this with things like Claude Code, where you can let it do the changes for you, there are sometimes changes that might be destructive, and you still have to be able to know when to stop, when to say no, making sure that we as humans still have that education, still have that understanding of how the system works, so that if we hand control over to the system and it's not doing what we want, we can actually understand where we need to come in and change things.
So, Ellie, are you able to share the variety of different resources that you and the team are putting together to help both technical teams and non-technical teams become AI ready, AI fluent? What resources are available to them, and we'll make sure to link them in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Would point people towards the Anthropic Academy. This is anthropic.com/learn. You can get there from our website or just that link. And this is where you can start taking a look at some text-based resources we have for getting up to speed, but also full-fledged video and text-based courses on AI fluency, API development, model context protocol, Claude Code. And even if you are not technical, just like we mentioned, getting that first 20-25% is extremely valuable. So getting that information not only from the source and the makers of many of these things, but also getting it in an environment where you can use the interface to chat with Claude and have questions answered as you're watching video and so on, is a really powerful way in a short period of time to get up to speed. The second piece that I'd recommend is taking a look at some of the research that we have for how educators use AI. And we can point towards the research that we have. We'll share some links here. But seeing how teachers use AI is a really powerful way to, as a learner, see for yourself how best to get up to speed, and use cases for people who are using AI to get better at AI as well. Obviously, using the system as much as possible is always a great way to do things. So making sure that you have your hands on a keyboard, as we'd say with any kind of learning, is going to be mission critical as well.
Great. Well, before we go, I'd love to learn about some of the AI workflows that you've adopted personally that you find a lot of usefulness from.
Yeah, very much so. So with Claude AI and the Claude Desktop tool, there are many different integrations that you can connect. This is powered by MCP, or the Model Context Protocol. And the amount of times that I will just ask Claude to search through Slack, search through my email, search through Google Drive, summarize things, find things for me across many different data sources, I use that daily. That is exceptionally valuable for me. Very low hanging fruit to integrate and connect with, and a really easy way to just build quickly and iterate quickly. Another thing that we've been experimenting with quite a bit is using a tool like Claude, and some folks in my team have built some really interesting tooling around this to build educational assets and particularly quizzes for you. It's very common that we see folks just ask Claude, make me a quiz on MCP and so on. But you need Claude to do a little bit more work. So how can you build a tool that takes that initial prompt, figures out the context it needs to actually create the quiz, and then makes the quiz, takes it itself, evaluates its progress, see how it does, that kind of self-evaluating loop that we're building. It's a really interesting workflow that I think is going to shape the way in which people learn much more effectively, as opposed to, I know about multiple choice, I know about quizzes, so let's try that. There's still so much more we can do to make that learning effective.
Okay, one last question. What are you most excited about over the next year or so as this technology progresses? What are you most looking forward to?
For me personally, I think the access to education for folks that learn in many different kinds of ways. And for me personally, I have a bunch of young kids who learn in many different and interesting ways and ways that are different than me. And using tools like AI to get answers to questions and see visualizations and create assets and media based on the things they're interested in, the way that they want to do it, is something that I'm exceptionally excited about. So the ability to have the personalized tutor that we've tried to have in for-profit education for so long, but one that is completely customizable and allows for people to be genuinely curious and not feel any pressure around it, is something I'm exceptionally excited for.
And just a selfish question for me as a parent, and I know you have several kids as well, Ellie, is how can we as parents prepare our kids for the radically different future that they're going to grow up in?
It's a phenomenal question. And, I get my cheat code is that my oldest kid at this moment of recording is 5.5. So I still got some time to figure it out. But that being said, I think we don't totally know, but the same way that we think about assessing information, and the same way that we even see this with a lot of college educators, of the days in which you assign a paper for students to write is just not going to be the case anymore. So I think that making sure that not only our kids are aware of this tool and its limitation, but also the educators that we work with and the folks that are in academic institutions are well aware that this is a very powerful tool for learning. It obviously can be used for cheating as well. So how do we draw the balance between those? I think that going back to the societal impact standpoint, it's obviously important to tell the next generation about this technology, but also make sure that the current generation that is educating the future is well aware of the pros and cons of this tool and what it's most likely going to look like when our kids use it.
Ellie, really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure.
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.